Ontario is planning to introduce a comprehensive digital ID program that will centralize every person's personal, financial, business, medical, and social information and assign them an identification under this system. Whereas central banks in Canada and around the world are already developing digital currency to replace paper and coin money. And these digital currencies will be integrated into any digital ID program.
So we have to prepare for a more angry world, and how to prepare? It means to take the necessary action to create a fairer world.
We are finding ourselves in a place where we have increasing polarization everywhere, and everything feels binary when it doesn't need to be. So I think we're going to have to think about a recalibration of a whole range of human rights that are playing out online, you know, from freedom of speech to the freedom to, you know, to be free from online violence, or the right of data protection.
We're developing through technology an ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean? That's where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
Okay, let's talk ID. I am not at all comfortable having a bunch of ID like credit cards and bank cards on my phone to scan. I'm assuming you are cut from a similar cloth.
Same. We are paranoid.
Yeah.
We feel if someone steals their phone, they already have enough information and photos and everything else as it is. Why give them our entire life and run amok with our credit cards?
If you're comfortable with it and you live in Ontario, you're going to have some choices here because Ontario's digital IDs will be launching later this year. The new government-issued IDs will live entirely on your device. So the good news is if you hate going to Service Ontario, which is always a pleasant experience in normal times, you don't have to go because you can just renew that way. But then again, everything's on your phone, so if you're paranoid like Dina and I, it's an issue. But just to lay it out, you can use your digital ID to check in for virtual medical appointments, apply for government assistance like CERB, EI, access vaccination records, which a lot of people might be doing over the next 12 months. You can also open a bank account. You can use it to obtain birth, marriage, and death certificates, says the government. No way am I having that much personal information on my phone. I'm not doing it.
It's terrifying. I am proud of the fact that I like to see my bank tellers face to face. I know their names. I like to kick it old school, and I think that we shouldn't be so heavily reliant on our phones.
For those who think the Great Reset is not going to control every aspect of your life, let me give you a couple of things. They are now taking the next step to shape global, regional, and industry agendas, end quote, with a new digital ID system. Under the framework, the WEF proposes collecting data from many aspects of people's everyday lives. That's a quote. Through their devices, telecommunication networks, and third-party service providers. The WEF suggests that this data collection dragnet would allow a digital ID. Now listen to this, it's very narrow. It would allow a digital ID to scoop up data on people's online behavior, purchase history, network usage, credit history, biometrics, names, national identity numbers, and medical history. Plus your travel history, social accounts, e-government accounts, bank accounts, energy uses, health stats, education, and I love this one, and more. What's left? Once the digital ID has access to this huge, highly personal set of data, the WEF proposes using it to decide whether users are allowed to, quote, own and use devices, quote, open bank accounts, quote, carry out online financial transactions, quote, conduct business transaction, quote, access insurance and treatment, book trips, still quoting, go through border control between countries or regions, still quoting, access third-party services that rely on social media logins, file taxes, vote, collect benefits, end quote. So, you know that passport that they gave you? It was so crazy to think that maybe that COVID passport might grow into something, exactly like this.
Let's also be clear. The future is not just happening. The future is built by us, by a powerful community as you here in this room. We have the means to improve the states of the world. But two conditions are necessary. The first one is that we act all as stakeholders of larger communities, that we serve not our only self-interests, but we serve the community.
I voted against the digital green certificate back in April. Unfortunately, it was adopted nonetheless. And this just goes to show there's only a minority of MEPs who truly stand for European values. The majority of MEPs, for whatever reasons unbeknown to me, obviously support oppression of the people while claiming shamelessly to do it for the people's own good. But it is not the goal that renders a system oppressive. It is always the methods by which the goal is pursued. Whenever a government claims to have the people's interest at heart, you need to think again. In the entire history of mankind, there has never been a political elite sincerely concerned about the well-being of regular people. Always question everything any government does. Let's be clear about one thing. No one grants me freedom, for I am a free person. It violates constitutionally guaranteed fundamental rights, and it constitutes the first step towards the insufferable Chinese social credit system.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China, because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime and say we need to go green as fast as we need to start investing in solar.
I found it a bit silly for Justin Trudeau to say that what he admired the most was a dictatorship, frankly. I've always been rather fond of democracies.
And it wasn't just politicians who condemned Trudeau's comments.
A Canadian politician said, I look for China. I'm admire of the basic dictatorship in China. That is not only shocking, that is a shame.
Now, being liked is one thing. When a future prime minister is asked the government he now most admires and answered that of communist China, because it could turn things around on a dime and order up green policies with a snap of their dictatorial fingers, we're staggered. That wasn't just dumb, admiring a murderous dictatorship. The record of Mao Zedong is a Hitler-scale blot on humanity.
We're seeing a backsliding of democracy everywhere around the world. And it has a lot to do with all sorts of different things, anxieties around the pace at which the world is changing, and people are looking towards easy answers or strongman leaders that are sort of reassuring. The challenge has been there a long while. When I got elected in 2015, so 7 years ago, one of the things that we put forward, and I remember saying this a whole bunch of times, attack politics, divisive politics, negative, stirring up of hate and fear and differences. The dirty secret is they work.
If you don't want to get vaccinated, that's your choice. But don't think you can get on a plane or a train beside vaccinated people and put them at risk.
Once you start, churning up anger, it just feeds on itself, and if you're not continually throwing fresh raw meat at it, it will get away from you entirely.
Qui sont extrémistes,
qui croient pas dans la science, qui sont souvent misogynes, souvent racistes aussi. C'est un petit groupe, mais qui prend de la place. Et là, il faut faire un choix en tant que leader, en tant que pays. Est-ce qu'on tolère ces...
And that's where we're seeing in Canada a certain number of
people who stirred up that starting to have it sort of turn back against them a little bit.
What we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, is that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more, half of this cabinet are for our actually young noble leaders of the world. Great.
Question commentaire, questions and comments. The honourable member for Oshawa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I listened to my colleague's speech. I had a constituent that wanted me to ask a question about outside interference to our democracy. Klaus Schwab is the head of the World Economic Forum, and he bragged how his subversive WEF, World Economic Forum, has, quoted, infiltrated governments around the world. He said that his organization had penetrated more than half of Canada's cabinet. And I was wondering, in the interest of transparency, could the member please name which cabinet ministers are on board with the WEF's agenda? My concern is the deputy.
Order. I know that the member was in a really good question there, but the audio is really bad, and the video is really bad as well.
The world which will come out of this fourth industrial revolution, it certainly will be a world. It will be a digital world. Now, who could represent such a world better than you, Prime Minister?
And now we may be on the cusp of change equal in magnitude and of a far swifter pace. New technology is always dazzling, but we don't want technology simply because it is dazzling. We want it, create it, and support it because it improves people's lives. It's not hard to see how the connections between computing, information, robotics, and biotechnologies could deliver spectacular progress. It's also not hard to imagine how it could produce mass unemployment and greater inequality.
Well, I think maybe in a couple of decades, when people look back, the thing they will remember from the COVID crisis is this is the moment when everything went digital. And if this was the moment when everything became monitored. That we agreed to be surveyed all the time, not just in authoritarian regimes, but even in democracies. And maybe most importantly at all, this was the moment when surveillance started going under the skin. Because really we haven't seen anything yet. I think that the big process that's happening right now in the world is hacking human beings, the ability to hack humans.
Is the European Union on its way to becoming a surveillance society like China? It's already under attack, and the European Parliament is something that would be ripe for government abuse.
Clearly, we are witnessing right now the Chinification of Europe. Because we see what is happening in China right now with the social credit score, where the government is monitoring and surveilling all the people from the beginning to end. Everything that they do, everything, everywhere where they walk, they control everything and they watch everything. This is the example of a tyranny.
The EU insists the digital identity program will be voluntary. Skeptics are wondering how long before it becomes mandatory. Not only are digital IDs coming to Europe, but in Italy, the cities of Rome and Bologna have begun social credit programs that reward citizens for behavior that officials think will fight climate change, like using a bicycle instead of a car. A social credit system could be easily incorporated into a digital identity.
I think there's going to be a lot of breakthroughs on the medical front.
particularly around synthetic mRNA. You can basically do anything with synthetic RNA, DNA. It's like a computer program. So, I think with enough, with effort, that's not too crazy. You could probably stop aging, reverse it if you want. You can basically do it. You can turn someone into a freaking butterfly if you want with the right DNA sequence.
But there is something new now. For the first time in history, it's possible to completely eliminate privacy. Mm-hmm. It was just never possible before, and it is possible now. Something fundamental has changed. Mm-hmm. When dictators always dreamt about completely eliminating privacy, monitoring everybody all the time, and knowing everything you do, and not just everything you do, but even everything you think and everything you feel.
And it would unlock countless opportunities for Canadians to verify who they are safely, quickly, and securely, while only revealing the information necessary for each transaction. A federated digital ID ecosystem developed in collaboration with Canada's best and brightest talent from our banks, telecommunication companies, law enforcement, and government. It would have the power and security to store every Canadian's electronic identity and attributes. A fast, easy, and secure way to bank, sign up for government services, renew driver's licenses or health cards, shop, travel, and more. Canada's banks are perfectly situated to help lead the creation of a federated digital ID system between government and the private sector. The World Economic Forum agrees that banks and financial institutions should lead the path forward for digital ID.
The WEF and banks are quite literally the world's wealthiest and elite, and their track record doesn't exactly prove they have the best interest of average people in mind. Now look, digitizing certain information is without a doubt convenient. I love being able to leave my house without my purse, knowing my credit cards are stored on my phone for unexpected trips to 7-Eleven. Why are they actively pushing for this concept of a digital society? Usually advancements in technology happen naturally. As more and more people adopt the new thing, the old thing becomes a relic. For example, neither the government nor banks nor elite came out advocating for me to switch from cassette tapes to CDs and then on to MP3s. But what's odd about digital identification system is that rather than just rolling them out and letting those who want to use them, it's being advocated for by bankers and elites and pushed for by the World Economic Forum, not as a choice, but as a requirement. As it is, currently about 1 billion people around the globe have no form of identification, no way to prove who they are. Their births are unrecorded. They were never registered with their government's vital records departments, if their government even had one at all. Of course, those who advocate for a digital identification system claim that the digital ID will solve many of these problems. If your vitals and attributes are on record, such as fingerprints or facial recognition, then the government will always know who you are and you'll never get lost in the system. They'll also always know where you are, what you buy, who you visit, where you travel, and which medicine you take, and what you're allergic to. They might want to use digital identification before you can log on to the internet so they can know which websites you visit and social you post. And I'm sure this will all be done not only for convenience, but for safety, they'll say. I doubt the government will use this digital identification to prevent you from entering bars and restaurants, traveling, or getting a job for not complying with a mandate the government has issued. I'm sure the government won't want to use this federated digital identification system to implement a social credit system where the goodies in society get more than the baddies. Don't worry, these are all conspiracy theories.
The irony, of course, is that the private sector is really leading the way in expanding control of the public that is then going to be exploited by governments around the world.
Right.
It's a nightmare.
Let's say you refused to wear a mask at the gym when you were supposed to. Totally hypothetically, and you got in trouble, and they said, if you do this again, we're going to disable your key fob's access to the gym. Again, hypothetical scenario, not something I totally did go through very recently.
Right, and so then people, this can be used then as a system of control.
Stel je nou eens voor dat met één druk op de knop jouw toegang tot sociale media accounts kan worden ontzegd omdat je fake news hebt verspreid. je rijbewijs niet meer geldig is omdat je in een te vervuilende auto rijdt, je straks geen vliegticket meer kan boeken omdat je al te veel CO2 zou hebben uitgestoten, of je de toegang tot het OV wordt ontzegd omdat je niet gevaccineerd bent. Het klinkt misschien onrealistisch, maar het is binnenkort allemaal mogelijk. Want de Europese Commissie kondigde in juni 2021 de officiële plannen aan voor een Europese digitale identiteit. Deze European Digital ID is een applicatie waarin al je persoonsgegevens centraal worden opgeslagen. En het is meer dan een soort online paspoort wat wordt gesuggereerd. De EU beschikt straks ten minste over je bank- en betalingsgegevens, je rijbewijs, je diploma's, je belastinggegevens, je belastingaangifte, je sociale media-accounts, je oogkleur, vingerafdruk en gezichtsvorm. Zoals te lezen in de brief van de staatssecretaris. Op basis van al deze gegevens kunnen overheden en bedrijven straks wel of geen toegang verschaffen tot hun producten en diensten. Zogenaamd nu nog allemaal vrijwillig, maar we weten allemaal hoe het ging met de corona QR-app. Als je hem niet hebt, dan mag je simpelweg niets meer.
Iran is set to be the first country to roll out a biometric digital ID needed in order to buy food. Needed in order to eat. Right? Needed in order to survive. You must go get your digital ID from the government. The same digital ID that central banks are telling us is needed in order to roll out the central bank digital currencies. In 2 months, citizens will be given digital coupons that will give access to a small number of subsidized bread purchases. Now, you can call it digital coupons all you want. What this describes is limiting people to a small number of bread purchases at affordable prices. The bottom line is people aren't going to eat unless they go to the government and get these digital biometric cards. It's planning to expand to cover other foods too. It is the wet dream of technocrats. They don't want you to eat meat. That's the bottom line here. A lot of the agenda that's described by the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution is being wrapped up in assistance to hungry people, because that's how they're ramming this agenda through. We're going to cause a tremendous run-up in food prices. When people can't afford to eat, we will offer them food tied to the exact system of slavery that we've been wanting to roll out. This is a classic problem-reaction solution, Hegelian dialectic played out using the most potent form of controlling people. As Henry Kissinger said, if you control food, you control people. The most important part is that is their goal, is to get everyone tracked and traced and tied in. That's why we have satellites in the sky watching us called climate tracing. That's why we have biobots in our sewers sampling the wastewater to know what we're eating. They've announced these things. They said it wasn't just for pandemic detection, it was for monitoring diets.
The digital identity is not just a passport that you will have on your iPhone in a digital form. It entails just about everything the government would like to know about you. And yesterday in the Dutch media, we saw a perfect example of what it could entail in the near future. We had the CEO of one of the largest Dutch banks say, why don't we start with a personal carbon credit? A carbon wallet, she called it, actually. Yeah. So right in line with the plans that the World Economic Forum people have for us. And she said it in a way that was particularly funny. She said, well, if everyone gets an individual personal carbon credit, why don't we make it so that rich people who, for example, want to go on holiday a little too often can buy personal carbon credit from other people who, for example, can't afford buying plane tickets or eating meat too often. So we can that way swap it out. So what will happen is the rich will get richer, the poor will get poorer, and they're saying it openly as if it's not a controversial thing at all.
With the number of international arrivals expected to grow 50% by 2030, travellers need seamless ways to cross borders that also protect national security while protecting their personal data. The Known Traveller Digital Identity, or KTDI, is a public-private collaboration that enhances security efforts. Travellers can share documentation and information from one verified identity with partners including government authorities, airlines, and hotels. Each data element shared by the traveller is verified, accurate, and consistent every time. This is made possible by the technologies of distributed ledger, cryptography, and biometrics. As more data and information is added, travelers build more enriched profiles that build trust with each partner interaction. Components of the known traveler digital identity will be championed by the governments of Canada and the Netherlands. Additional partners include Air Canada, KLM Royal Dutch Airlines, Toronto Pearson International Airport, Montreal Trudeau International Airport, and Amsterdam Airport Schiphol, in collaboration with the World Economic Forum and Accenture.
The importance of our mission, the whole ID4D is about digital ID. And all of us today take our ID for granted. All of us have legal ID and most likely also a digital ID. And it has been the gateway for us to participate in the economy, participate in all things that are about living and about accessing to essential services. The times of today, the way we are seeing how the COVID-19 pandemic has evolved and has actually emphasized the need for such a digital ID system. And we all know that the trusted digital ID system is only one of the core building blocks of what's called the stack, that together with digital payments and data interoperability and shared services can be transformational for not just delivering the social assistance that we are seeing happening, but also to build an inclusive and resilient digital economy and societies. So we really look forward to continuing to scale up our thought leadership, our convening power, our advice and financing to help countries have a resilient recovery and emerge from this crisis stronger and more inclusive than before, and use the opportunity to accelerate digital transformation at the same time.
We need to make very difficult choices. There are trade-offs, but this is our chance. And this is about risk and it's about resilience because the shocks are coming.
At its core, digital ID is exactly that. It's just a form of proving your identity online through some sort of digital means. If you go through their materials, they envision a digital ID being used before you can access government services, before you can access your finances, your healthcare, before you can vote, and also being used in commerce. So at the end of the day, digital ID is a technology. It's the potential it provides to be used, and something like this could potentially be used to centralize almost every domain of our public life.
How we construct and use digital identities would determine how people are represented online, what opportunities they have access to, what or who is trusted online. So it's quite a foundational role that identity plays in digital economies and societies, and so one needs to shape it.
Obviously, it's already being implemented in certain countries around the world. I want to get into a prime example, but this would very much allow the government to have theoretically live minute-to-minute updates of where you are, what you're spending money on, what you're doing. It would also afford the government the opportunity to basically shut you down, lock you out of key services, which again may seem like a nightmare or dystopic scenario, but we already saw it happen recently. But for people who think that this is science fiction, this is effectively already in place in China.
It's really not one social credit system. It's social credit systems that are maintained by different databases, by different both government agencies and jurisdictions have their own databases, but also certain private companies have their own databases. But basically the way it works in China is if you have an account or a profile in one of these social credit systems, it tracks you, they assign points, and then they add or deduct points depending on your behavior and the government's approval of it. So it can range from something as simple as jaywalking, you get deducted certain points, to something more significant like dissent against the government being punished.
Digital ID presents an emerging threat to the privacy and liberty of Canadians. Digital ID will let governments access confidential personal and financial information and store this information in databases. These technologies equip Canadian governments to interfere in your personal affairs and in some cases to place unjustified restrictions on what you do, what you buy, where you go, and what medical interventions you choose. COVID has been used as a pretext to accelerate the government's plan to implement an all-encompassing digital ID. Vaccine QR passports have already been used to coerce the population into compliance with arbitrary COVID mandates and to exclude law-abiding citizens from ordinary life. For exercising their freedom of choice and medical privacy, Canadians have been subjected to being treated like second-class citizens, denied access to restaurants, gyms, libraries, museums, and air travel without a government-issued vaccine passport or QR code. In February of 2022, Canada's federal government tracked and froze the bank accounts of dozens of peaceful Freedom Convoy protesters and hundreds of Canadians from coast to coast who donated to their cause. This happened without court oversight and without any opportunity to defend or reverse this aggressive government action. Canada is on a dangerous path towards unprecedented government surveillance and control, a veritable digital dictatorship. In our long history, every generation has been asked to trade in a set of fundamental rights and freedoms for convenience, for efficiency, for a shorter line, for questionable benefits. We've seen through it before, and we can see past this convenience and expediency and modernization to the digital beast. Digital ID might deliver faster services to millions of compliant, unsuspecting Canadians, but it will come at the cost of tracking and tracing every Canadian.